Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming, and maybe this is a good moment to remind you to turn off your cell phones. Thanks for coming to our program. Most of you probably know that tickets for this event sold out in the first 3 weeks when we put them on last December. So Santa Cruz is really ready for Ursula LeGuin. Tonight's talk is the first event in a 3-day conference, Anthropocene, Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet. The conference brings together scientists, scholars, writers, and artists to renew conversation about life on Earth through noticing, describing, curiosity, and imagination. The papers are addressed to the public, so I don't think you'll find them dry or obfuscating. And contrary to what you may have read, the conference is free and open to the public. You do not need tickets. The rest of the conference will be held on the UCSC campus in the college's 9 and 10 multipurpose room. You can find driving directions on our website, which is http anthropo.ucsc.edu, and I'll put this in the back for when you leave.
Tell us your name.
Oh, I'm Anna Singh, and I'm one of the co-directors of the conference. We also have a few programs for Friday and Saturday events in the back of the hall, and if you were planning to go to the conference anyway, please do not take one. There'll be plenty more tomorrow, but these are for those who might be interested in the event but would like to check it out first. A feast of amazing thinkers will be there, and I hope to see some of you there tomorrow and Saturday. Before we begin, I want to extend a special thank you to the UC Santa Cruz Foundation, which made it possible for Ursula LeGuin to be with us tonight. The conference has many other donors and supporters, and I'll tell you about them tomorrow morning. For now, however, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Professor Bettina Apteker, who's the UC Presidential Co-Chair of Feminist Critical Race and Ethnic Studies. And Professor Apteker will introduce our main speaker.
Thank you so much, and I join with delight with Anna Singh in welcoming you to this evening for what promises to be a most auspicious beginning for this conference. I am tasked with an introduction, and especially to introduce each of our speakers tonight. I'm going to do it now. I'm going to do them all together so I don't have to come back up here. And I'm going to do it also with them in relationship to each other. So I'm going to do them individually and also in relationship to each other. And I understand that tonight's program, Ursula LeGuin will begin this evening reading from her works, and then Donna Haraway and James Clifford will comment and dialogue with her. With Ursula LeGuin, Donna Haraway, and James Clifford, we have a bounty of poetic, intellectual, and creative riches. To have the three of them in the same room at one time in conversation with each other feels like some kind of magic realism. Although in reality, it is their abundant generosity that makes this possible. I have known each of these folks for many years, both personally and through their writings, classes, lectures, and readings. I entered the History of Consciousness program at UCSC in the fall of 1979. And the following year served as a graduate student representative on the committee that hired Donna Haraway for a position in feminist theory. Donna became my advisor, and I remember with great pleasure that she hooded me when I received my PhD. So many of Donna's books and essays have inspired me, got me to thinking, writing, questioning, and sharing her work with students. Whether it was her Cyborg Manifesto or Teddy Bear Patriarchy that was later incorporated into her book, Primate Visions, Gender, Race, and Nature in the World, or her remarkable study of feminism and technoscience called Modest Witness at Second Millennium, and her more recent Companion Species Manifesto. And she has continued, of course, to work and write, teach. Jim Clifford had only recently joined the History of Consciousness faculty when I became a graduate student, and how fortunate I was to be in his seminars, some of them team-taught, with the preeminent historian Hayden White. There in the late 1970s and early 1980s, I was a budding feminist, all alive and alert to every nuance, trying to reconcile Marxism and feminism, which turned out to be quite difficult. But sorry. This is an unexpected laughter pause. But in Jim's seminars, I was introduced to the post-structuralists like Levi Strauss and postmodernists like Michele Foucault, who had just then published The History of Sexuality, and then to Lacan and Derrida. And if you don't know who these folks are, that's fine. And if you do, you understand the richness of my very wonderful education. For me, it was a new world opening, new ways of thinking, breaking out of the confines of the very orthodox Marxism I had known. Jim's work is what we might call critical post-colonial anthropology and indigenous studies. And it has a profound impact not only in anthropology, but on the creation of a whole field in what I think of, and this may be wrong, but what I think of as critical cultural studies. From The Predicament of Culture in 1988 to On the Edge of Anthropology, which were interviews in 2003, to his Routes, Travel, and Translation in the late 20th century from 1997. And just a few months ago, Jim published Returns, Becoming Indigenous in the 21st Century. Chapter 4 of that book is titled Ishi, bringing us a beautiful, gentle, relentlessly radical telling of the history of Ishi, the so-called wild man, the last of his people, the Yahi driven to extinction by the slaughter of settler colonialism in California. It was Alfred Kroeber, Ursula Le Guin's father, and the preeminent anthropologist of the early 20th century who worked with Ishi, but who ultimately in the end could not finally protect him from the ravages of modern science at the time of his death. Ursula Le Guin is one of the most precious and prolific writers cast in the genre of science fiction, whose works have inspired generations, whether it be from first reading Left Hand of Darkness, all the way back in 1969, to the Earthsea trilogy, or Tehanu, or The Compass Rose, or Dancing at the Edge of the World, and I have mentioned only a few of the titles that go on and on and on, a veritable outpouring of feminist, Taoist-inspired, perhaps also, one may say, indigenous-inspired fiction, poetry also, and essays, commentaries. In 1985, I read Ursula's book called Always Coming Home, and I loved it and I taught it for years. This creation of a whole culture of the Kesh people set in the valley of the Na, thousands of years from now, large sections of the planet poisoned and in ruin and flooded, and yet this beautiful culture arises, and at its center is the oral history of a woman called stone-telling. I taught this book, and then in the early 1990s, I invited Ursula to come to UCSC. She came for a week as a Regents lecturer and taught several classes, gave writing workshops and public talks, and I think we all quite fell in love with her. To my mind, what links Donna and Jim and Ursula is that each in their own way sees themselves and the world in constant motion, with everything in relation to everything else, and one's vision, therefore, always partial and incomplete, and yet striving for wholeness and beauty, balance and redemption. And above all, I think in each of their works, in their own ways, they have challenged paradigms of domination, insisted upon the responsibility of each and every one of us human beings in how the planet fares, in the decisions we make. Decisions that can annihilate and have annihilated whole species by the hundreds, produced global warming and its devastating effects, including the rise of the oceans and weather patterns that have already wrought catastrophe and untold suffering. And yet with that responsibility as human beings comes hope and promise, thought and creation. In a lesser-known work by Donna Haraway in the form of an interview with Thurza Goodeve called How Like a Leaf, Donna says, I am fascinated with the molecular architecture that plants and animals share, as well as the kind of instrumentation, interdisciplinarity, and knowledge practices that have gone into the historical possibilities of understanding how I am like a leaf. I am a literal person, and I take this in a literal way, in that leaf and I are alive, and forms of life, and more importantly, we depend on one another. We breathe, and in my breath is leaf's breath, and so too in your breath. Jim, in his most recent book with its chapter on Ishi, reflecting on his work in relationship to Ursula's, writes, quote, I also find a particular support in the writing of Ursula Le Guin. Her anthropologically inflected science fiction meditates on issues fundamental to Ishi's legacy: colonization, violence, cultural transformation, and exchange. And she helped me think about possible futures of a post-colonial California. I take all of this very literally, too, in thinking about the fragility of the moment in which we are living and for which we are responsible, and how much it requires of us a caution, a careful weighing, a modest approach, and a compassion arising from our understanding that we are all interconnected. We are all part of one another, species to species, planet to universe. There is no such thing as the other. In the Delaine language of the people we know as Navajo, the word Hojo translates in English to mean beauty, but it doesn't mean beauty in the English-American sense of that word. In Danai, the word beauty translates more accurately as harmony. And to walk in beauty would mean to walk in harmony and balance with the earth. But actually, as I understand it, walking in beauty, walking in harmony with the earth is very, very difficult. Think of what it would mean to do no harm, to not take what is not given. When I think of Ursula Le Guin's epic work, Always Coming Home, which affected me so deeply, I think about these questions of beauty and harmony, and not doing harm, and not taking what is not given. And I think about cycles of life and the balance that emanates from those cycles. And I think of Ursula's poem in Always Coming Home, the poem called To Gehenna by Stone Telling. Old stone, hold my soul when I am not in this place. Face the sunrise for me. Grow warm slowly when I am not alive anymore. Face the sunrise for me. Grow warm slowly. This is my hand on you, warm. This is my breath on you, warm. This is my heart in you, warm. This is my soul in you, warm. You will be here a long time, facing the sunrise with the warmth in you. When you roll down, when you break apart, when the earth changes, when the rockness of you ends, we will be shining. We will be dancing, shining. We will be warmth, shining. Friends, sisters, and brothers, please join me in welcoming Ursula Le Guin, Donna Haraway, and James Clifford.
Thank you, Bettina. And thank you, Santa Cruz, for having me back. I like this place. And I'm very proud to sort of be in on the kickoff of this conference. I think it's going to be, some important things are going to be said. Would it be possible to have the house lights up a little bit? It would be awfully nice to be able to see all these people here, if this is possible. Lights person. What I'm going to do to start off, is the sound okay? I'm going to read you an academic essay, because this is an academic conference after all, and I'm going to read a little talk written for tonight, and then some poems, and then we'll converse. So I'm starting with an editorial by the president of the Therolinguistics Association, written in 1974. And it's from the author of The Acacia Seeds and other extracts from the Journal of the Association of Therolinguistics. What is language? This question, central to the science of therolinguistics, has been answered heuristically by the very existence of the science. Language is communication. That is the axiom on which all our theory and research rest, and from which all our discoveries derive. And the success of the discoveries testifies to the validity of the axiom. But to the related yet not identical question, what is art, we have not yet given a satisfactory answer. Tolstoy, in the book whose title is that question, answered it firmly and clearly: art is communication. This answer has, I believe, been accepted without examination or criticism by therolinguistics. For example, why do therolinguists study only animals? Because plants do not communicate. Plants do not communicate. That is a fact. Footnote 2014. Though this theory still has many adherents, it cannot now be spoken of as a fact. Therefore, plants have no language. Very well. That follows from our basic axiom. Therefore, also, plants have no art. But stay, that does not follow from the basic axiom, only from the unexamined Tolstoyan corollary. What if art is not communicative? What if some art is communicative and some art is not? Ourselves, animals, predators, we look naturally for an active, predatory, communicative art. And when we find it, we recognize it. The development of this power of recognition and the skills of appreciation is a recent and glorious achievement. But I submit that for all the tremendous advances made by therolinguistics during the last decades, we are only at the beginning of our age of discovery. We must not become slaves to our own axioms. We have not yet lifted our eyes to the vaster horizons before us. We have not faced the almost terrifying challenge of the plant. If a non-communicative vegetative art exists, we must rethink the very elements of our science. For it is simply not possible to bring the critical and technical skills appropriate to the study of weasel murder mysteries, or batrachian erotica, or the tunnel sagas of the earthworm, to bear on the art of the redwood or the zucchini. This is proved conclusively by the failure, noble failure, of the efforts of Dr. Srivas in Calcutta using time-lapse photography to produce a lexicon of sunflower. His attempt was daring but doomed to failure, for his approach was kinetic, a method appropriate to the communicative arts of the tortoise, the oyster, and the sloth. He saw the extreme slowness of the kinesis of plants, and only that is the problem to be solved. But the problem was far greater. The art he sought, if it exists, is a non-communicative art, probably a non-kinetic one. It is possible that time, the essential element, matrix, and measure of all known animal art, doesn't enter into vegetable art at all. The plants may use the meter of eternity. We do not know. We do not know. All we can guess is that the putative art of the plant is entirely different from the art of the animal. What it is, we can't say. We haven't yet discovered it. Yet I predict that it exists, and that when it is found, it will prove to be not an action, but a reaction, not a communication, but a reception. It will be exactly the opposite of the art we know and recognize. It will be the first passive art known to us. Can we in fact know it? Can we ever understand it? It will be immensely difficult, that's clear, but we should not despair. Remember that so late as the mid-20th century, most scientists and many artists didn't believe that even dolphin would ever be comprehensible to the human brain. Let another century pass and we may seem equally laughable. Do you realize, the phytolinguist will say to the aesthetic critic, that they couldn't even read eggplant? And they will smile at our ignorance as they pick up their rucksacks and hike on up to read the newly deciphered lyrics of the lichen on the north face of Pikes Peak. And with them or after them, may there not come that even bolder adventurer, the first geolinguist, who, ignoring the delicate, transient lyrics of the lichen, will read beneath it the still less communicative, still more passive, wholly atemporal, cold, volcanic poetry of the rocks, each one a word spoken how long ago by the earth itself in the immense solitude, the immenser community of space. And my little talk is called Deep in Admiration. This conference is going to be thinking about how to think outside the mindset that sees the techno-fix as the answer to all problems. Just this week, I heard a poet say that the essence of modern high technology is to consider the world as disposable. Use it and throw it away. Well, we know that we don't need more infantile new technologies that demand throwing away all the old ones every Tuesday. We need adult rational technologies, old and new. Pottery making, bricklaying, sewing, carpentry, solar power, sustainable farming. But after our long orgy of being lords of creation and texting as we drive, it's hard to stop looking for the next techno-fix. We have got to change our minds. To use the world well, we need to relearn our being in it, renew our awareness of belonging to the world. How do we go about it? That awareness seems always to have involved knowing our kinship as animals with animals. Darwin gave that knowledge a scientific basis. And now both poets and scientists are extending our awareness of our relationship to creatures without nervous systems and to non-living beings, our fellowship as things with other things. Relationship among all things seems to be complex and reciprocal. It's always at least two-way, back and forth. It seems that nothing is single in this universe and nothing goes one way. And in this view, humans appear as particularly lively, intense, aware nodes of relation in an infinite network of connections, simple or complicated, direct or hidden, strong or delicate, temporary, very long-lasting, a web of connections infinite but locally fragile, with and among everything, all beings, including what we generally class as things, objects. Now, Descartes and the behaviorists willfully saw dogs as machines without feeling. Is seeing plants as without feeling a similar arrogance? We don't know. But one way to stop seeing trees or rivers or hills only as natural resources is to class them as fellow beings, kinfolk. I guess what I'm trying to do is subjectify the universe, because look where objectifying it has got us. To subjectify is not to co-opt and colonize and exploit. Rather, if it's done honestly, it involves a great reach outward of the mind and the imagination. What tools do we have to help us make such a reach? Mary Jacobus, in a book called Romantic Things, wrote, "The regulated speech of poetry may be as close as we can get to such things, to the stilled voice of the inanimate object or the insentient standing of trees. Poetry is the human language that can try to say what a tree or a rock or a river is, that is, to speak humanly for it in both senses of the word for. A poem can do so by relating the quality of an individual relationship to a thing, a rock, a river, a tree. The relationship to, or simply by describing the thing as truthfully as possible. Science describes accurately from outside, and poetry describes accurately from inside, you could say. Science explicates, poetry implicates. Both celebrate what they describe. We need the language of both science and poetry to save us from ignorant irresponsibility. By replacing ignorance and unfounded opinion, science can increase moral sensibility. By demonstrating and performing aesthetic order or beauty, poetry can move minds to the sense of fellowship, which prevents careless usage and exploitation of our fellow beings, waste and cruelty. Now, poetry often serves religion, and the monotheistic religions privileging humanity's relationship with the divine tend to encourage arrogance. And yet, even in that hard soil, poetry will find the language of compassionate fellowship with our fellow beings. Henry Vaughan, 17th century Christian mystic, wrote, "So hills and valleys into singing break, and though poor stones have neither speech nor tongue, while active winds and streams both run and speak, yet stones are deep in admiration." Now, by admiration, I think Vaughan meant reverence for God's sacred order of things and joy in it, delight in it. And by admiration, I understand reverence for the infinite connectedness, the naturally sacred order of things, and joy in it, delight in it. So we admit stones to our Holy Communion, and so the stones may admit us to theirs. Okay, now I'm going to read about 8 poems, hoping to kind of follow up on some of these themes. One of them is an oldish poem called The Marrow, going on with stones for a bit. There was a word inside a stone. I tried to pry it clear, mallet and chisel, pick and gad, until the stone was dropping blood, but still I could not hear the word the stone had said. I threw it down beside the road among 1,000 stones, and as I turned away, it cried the word aloud within my ear, and the marrow of my bones heard and replied. This is a very old poem. This goes back 40 years or more. It's called Tao Song. Oh, slow fish, show me the way. Oh, green weed, grow me the way. The way you go, the way you grow, is the way indeed. Oh, bright sun, light me the way, the right way, the one no one can say. If one can choose it, it is wrong. Sing me the way, O song. No one can lose it for long. I need some water. I bet I can't get the lid off. Oh, I can't. That almost never happens anymore. This poem is called The Story. It's just part of a story, actually quite a lot of stories. The part where the third son or the stepdaughter, sent on the impossible errand through the uncanny forest, comes across a fox with its paw caught in a trap. Or little sparrows fallen from the nest. or some ants in trouble in a puddle of water. He frees the fox. She puts the fledglings in the nest. They get the ants safe to their anthill. The little fox will come back later and lead him to the castle where the princess is imprisoned. The sparrows will fly before her to where the golden egg is hidden. And the ants will sort out every poppy seed for them from the heap of sand before the fatal morning. And I don't think I can add much to this story. All my life it's been telling me, if I'll only listen, who the hero is and how to live happily ever after. This is Kinship. This poem came out recently in Orion magazine, nice magazine. Oh, all magazines that publish my poetry are nice, but Orion's particularly nice. Kinship. Very slowly burning, the big forest tree stands in the slight hollow of the snow, melted around it by the mild, long heat of its being and its will to be root, trunk, branch, leaf, and know earth dark, sunlight, wind touch, bird song. Rootless and restless and warm-blooded, we blaze in the flare that blinds us to that slow, tall, fraternal fire of life, as strong now as in the seedling 2 centuries ago. We were up on Mount Hood, and I was looking at those little hollows that form around trees in the snow, even little bushes. It's the warmth of life. This poem has 3 parts. It's called Whiteness, Meditations for Melville. Whiteness crossed the continent, a poison fog, and where it went, villages were vacant, hearths and ways forsaken. Whiteness with greed and iron makes the deep seas barren. Great migrations fly day long into whiteness and are gone. 2. Whiteness in its righteousness bleaches creatures colorless, tolerates no shadow. 3. People walk unseeing, unseen, staring at a little screen where the whiteness plays an imitation of their days. Plugged in their ears, white noise drowns an ancient voice murmuring to bless darkness. Infinitive. We make too much history. With us or without us, there will be the silence and the rocks and the far shining. But what we need to be is, this small talk of swallows in evening over dull water under willows. To be, we need to know the river holds the salmon and the ocean holds the whales as lightly as the body holds the soul in the present tense, in the present tense. And the next poem is called Futurology. Because I've written science fiction, I'm always accused of writing about the future. And I've never, ever tried to write about the future. We have nothing but the present tense. Futurology. I cannot break free from these iron stars. I want the raspberry paw pads of the fox, but here are only claws, the crab, the scorpion, great shining signs that slide across the sky. I want the wisdom ignorant of wars and the soft key that opens all the locks. I want the touch of fur, the slant of sun deep in a golden slotted changing eye. Oh, let there be no signs. Let fall the bars, and walls be moss-grown, scattered rocks. Let all the evil we have done be done, and minds lie still as sunlit meadows lie. And I will end with a hymn to Aphrodite. The poet Lucretius has been very important to me almost ever since I could read poetry. He's pretty hard going in Latin, I can tell you, but he's kind of tough in English too. But he is, well, and his great poem, The Nature of Things, opens with a wonderful invocation to Venus, who as the mother of life. And I wanted to bring Lucretius' Venus over to my ocean. And so the poem actually begins with a Latin line, forgive me. Venus solis occasus orientisque, dea pacifica, foam-born, implacable, tender. War and storm serve you, and you wear the fiery tiara of the volcanoes. Young salmon swimming downriver and the old upstream to breed and die are yours, and the fog-drinking forests. Yours are the scattered emerald half-circles of islands, the lost islands. Yours are the sunken warships of the emperor and the slow swirl of pelagic polymers. The moon is your hand mirror. Mother of time and daughter of destruction, your feet are light upon the waters. Death, your dog, follows you down the beaches, whining to see the breakers break into blossom, into immortal foam flowers, where you have left the bright track of your passing. Pity your fearful, foolish children, O Aphrodite of Fukushima.
Well, we move to the next stage, and the plan is that Donna and I will each speak briefly about what Ursula LeGuin has meant to us and raise some questions that are on our mind. And then we will have a conversation. We don't think of this as an interview, question, answer, but throwing out some questions and together talking about it as best we can. But this is not scripted, so...
There may be long pauses.
Yeah.
The silence of the rocks is good.
Well, Silence of the Rock is not something
Go
that
ahead, Jim.
Donna and I are very good at.
Just go.
So, well, anyway, I'm certainly honored to be part of this conversation with my old friend, Donna Haraway, and my new friend, Ursula LeGuin. Ursula, I've been reading your work for a long time, and it's seeped into my consciousness in ways that I have only begun really to understand. And most recently, writing that essay that Bettina talked about Ishi, which, as I tracked all the various Ishi stories, and I tried to track up all those that I had access to, the kind of extended family of the Krobers and the world of Berkeley anthropology, which was very much part of that story. And I thought, well, I really must talk about Ursula LeGuin. She's part of at least the extended family. And then, as I started reading and rereading works, you in a nice way hijacked the whole essay, and I ended up writing a lot about you at the end, which I sent to you, and you braced yourself, and then rather graciously told me you liked it, which was an enormous relief to me, believe me. But I hope we can talk about the two works. The two works I wrote about were The Word for World is Forest, our brilliant novella that many of you, I'm sure, know, and Always Coming Home that Bettina talked about. And I hope we can talk a bit about Always Coming Home, especially because it brings us into intimate contact with the world that we're actually in, the world of California. It's the Napa Valley, but Northern California and Oregon, where Ursula lives today. A population, animals, flora, fauna, geology, and human history, which all are deeply part of that world, which may be projected into some sort of notion of the future, but really is about another present, I think, or another kind of present, perhaps. The book, Always Coming Home, is a wonderful and strange kind of book, and it raises the inescapable question: if it's a work of utopia, a utopian fiction, what kind of utopia is this? Or, more profoundly, is it even possible to conceive of the future, if utopias are supposedly in the future, not here and now? And can we really think about the future concretely? And this is a big question for our conference, which has a kind of historicizing title to it. You know, the latest in a series of geological epochs. Anyway, I'd like to read a favorite passage of mine from your 1982 essay, and I guess it's as close as you ever get to writing theory.
I hope so.
Well, I think it's within translation range of theory for sure, but it's not theory. It's not theory the way we're used to it in the academy. I'm happy to report. As you'll see, I'm going to read a passage from it. It's called "A Non-Euclidean View of California as a Cold Place to Be." It's an essay where you imagine a yin way of thinking about utopia is different from a more linear, masculine Western way of imagining ourselves in time's arrow, the utopist, as you call him, narrating, driving, actually on a motorcycle, driving a path forward through time. A cold place to be, this evokes Levi Strauss's well-known opposition between cold and hot societies. It used to at least be a well-known dichotomy, and where cold would be referred to tribal, aboriginal, indigenous cultures, and in a hot perspective, we're in constant turmoil, zooming ahead into the future for better and for worse, progress and or apocalypse. Cold is slow but not inert or unchanging, but more rooted in place, I suppose more like plants and trees in the language we're using now. Slower and darker, abandoning the radiant sandcastle of progress, you write, to let our eyes adjust to a dimmer light. Perhaps in this light we can see what's already there in the shadows. Here's the quote. Copernicus told us that the Earth was not the center. Darwin told us that man was not the center. If we listened to the anthropologists, we might hear them telling us, with appropriate indirectness, that the white West is not the center. The center of the world is a bluff on the Klamath River, a rock in Mecca, a hole in the ground in Greece. Nowhere, its circumference everywhere. Perhaps the utopist should heed this unsettling news at last. Perhaps the utopist would do well to lose the plan, throw away the map, get off the motorcycle, put on a very strange-looking hat, bark sharply 3 times, and trot off, looking thin, yellow, and dingy, across the desert and up into the Digger Pines.
Yes.
Whoa. Yeah, exactly. When I read that the first time, I really wanted to cheer. Now, there's theory for you. The unsettling news that Copernicus, Darwin, and yes, I underline, the anthropologists bring. the metamorphosis of the utopist into a critter very much like Coyote. And we just, there's a poem that you didn't read about the Canada lynx walking softly out of sight, or at least out of our sight. For me, your work presumes the decentering of the West that 20th century anthropology was a part of, a difficult part of. And this profound decentering brings the possibility of perceiving alternate paths in the present, oblique and looping destinies. It brings a sense of historical times, plural, of specific temporal scales and embodied experiences of the real, ontologies. These are some of the questions I bring from your work as we think about our survival together and apart in a damaged, transforming world. Donna.
So we thought we would each give our brief thinking with Ursula and then open it up. And I told Jim ahead of time that we're both a little starstruck, and that if we were struck wordless, we would have done our job, since neither of us is actually legendary for brevity. So we gave each other permission to kick each other. So that if you see a little of that going on, it's along the lines of collegial and friendly behavior.
Do I have permission
To kick?
Yes, well, actually, oh dear, it's worse than I feared.
You can throw stuff. Got any fruit?
So, like Jim, I want to open up the questions of the many times, the many rhythms, the more than one story, the coming to concreteness that is so crucial for what Jim calls big enough stories, that we certainly need to change the story, which Ursula has done many times, as well as written and talked about, the urgent need somehow to tell other stories that have a purchase on the possibility of the life story, of the ongoing story, of the thick present tense, and what it would take to do that. With every imaginable skill and capacity of being with, of ongoing with, that we all could conjure. I think I don't know when I first met Ursula LeGuin's teaching, but I have ordered it in a certain way for the purposes of these 5 minutes. And the carrier bag theory of fiction is certainly another act of theory, Ursula, you must admit, that touched me and has stayed with me in an astonishingly deep way. It made it possible for me to write Primate Visions in a lot of ways, because the carrier bag, the collecting up of the things of the world that could somehow be shared for the purposes of making living and dying well, the small technologies that make our species what we are, the net bag to carry a kid, to collect some food while chatting with each other, the kinds of socialities and collectings and takings and givings and sharings of the ongoing story, instead of yet one more time the hero prick story and his tragic detumescence. The endless parabola of the conic forms of Galileo, you know. I gave as my job talk on this campus. You remember that Bettina and Jim, also on the committee, hired me a talk on the parabolic forms and his scam. His con, not his con, but his con. Never mind. In the carrier bag theory of
We
fiction,
hired her anyway.
and I blame Ursula because I had already been reading this woman and her kin. I had already been reading James Tiptree Jr. and those writers who shaped me in my molecules. And I quote, I just want to read one sentence out of the carrier bag theory of fiction. So you get up and you go to the damn soggy oat patch in the rain. Wouldn't it be a good thing if you had something to put baby oo in so you could pick the oats with both hands? A leaf, a gourd, a shell, a net, a bag, a sling, a sack, a bottle, a pot, a box, a container, a holder, a recipient. I would like to propose that that is a theory of technology. And I'd like to open up something about the technologies that we need to think about and build and remember, and that the questions of stories and technologies co-implicate each other. And it matters which stories tell stories, it matters which thoughts think thoughts. And that the carry bag theory of fiction, I propose, is a really essential story theory of technology. It's many things. I propose it that way. Now, in her a really amazing little report of the Therolinguists in The Author of the Acacia Seeds, which she read the last section, Anna Tsing and I taught buffalo gals and other animal presences together in a graduate seminar that was Joined Feminist Theory and Theories of Culture. See, you were put there. And we taught these stories under the rubric of geofeminisms. I first read The Author of the Acacia Seeds then with Anna in our efforts somehow to think well about environmentalisms and ecologies and feminisms and stories and storytelling. And one of the sections in there involves the question of the Therolinguists learning to read penguin. For which they had to engage photography, because they had, first of all, to understand that the penguins are swimming and that their semiosis, their language, is kinetic and in the waters. If you were going to read penguin, you absolutely must engage the kinesthetics of the dance in all of your technical and poetic and narrative lust and savvy, that the learning to read penguin, the semiosis of the penguin, was this intensely erotic cognitive achievement of the Therolinguists, who were a rather odd lot in this story, it must be said. Not altogether lovable, as the president's report on the questions of whether the plant is communicative or not. I, of course, have been schooled with this beautiful anthropologist and science studies person, Natasha Myers at York University, who is deeply immersed in thinking about what she calls involutionary momentum rather than evolutionary momentum. She is a Darwinist, as aren't we all. Anybody not a Darwinist can leave through the wide open door right back there. There are many ways, of course, to read Darwin, but I am not kidding. Anyway. Seriously. So anyway, I was trying actually to say something about the lyrics of the lichen, and the geolinguist and the vast. The juxtaposition in the same sentence of the incommunicative space, the word, and the vast community. There's this insistence on the implosion of not contradictions, not opposites, but rubbings together of things that don't necessarily rest easily with each other. The word, the emptiness, the community, the concreteness.
Your time is up.
And my time is up. But I get to say one more thing, which is about the word for world is forest. Because this is where Ursula LeGuin teaches us at the end, in the mouth of Selver, what the movie Avatar could not face. Which is to say, when the men of the Ecumen tried to say, well, now we're leaving you, everything will be fine, the vast exterminationist, genocidal, colonizing, mining war is over, you can go back to the way you were, we promise we won't show up again. And Selver looks him in his eyes and he says, we cannot pretend any longer that we don't know how to murder each other, not just kick out the colonist, and that you can't go back inside the dream. And I think all of this conference is in the wisdom of that Selver telling the colonists who thought he could leave, that we can't pretend any longer we don't know how to murder each other. So the ongoing story, when innocence is not even dreamable, the life story, and how to tell it.
No.
I'm done.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to any of the things we've said, or shall we feed something to you?
No, feed.
Your food pellet is coming. Well, I said I would hope we could talk a little bit about Always Coming Home, which one, I confess that was the title I wanted for my book, but it was taken. I would have taken that from the last book I wrote. I mean, it's just a terrific processual thing, title. I mean, because one is always coming and never arriving, but the coming home is what it's all about. And I really do think that works for the business of being indigenous or indigenizing today. And I'm an immigrant to California, and I've read some things in which you've described yourself as immigrants, and your parents at least as immigrants, that is to California. And we're not the original people of this state. It's a settler colonial state. But we become indigenous here. There are differential ways of becoming indigenous, and we do this. And I found that Always Coming Home was an enormous resource for me, getting me to unthink what I thought a proper landscape and proper flora and fauna were, which were New England, right? And to see what's here. And now, with your help, and with 35 years of being here, I finally started to do it. And that involved making friends with the quail, who sometimes allow me to see them in my driveway. But I'm interested in your own life story, if you're willing to talk about it a bit. You're a kid who grew up in Berkeley,
Yeah.
but your family had a summer place in Napa, which was, you've said it in various times and places, was a really formative place for you. And I wonder if you'd be willing to talk about it. And I know in some of your recent poems you seem to have returned to the house.
I'm always coming home.
Back. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That book was written in that house. My dad bought it's an old 1872 ranch house in the hills above St. Helena. He bought it in 1931 for, the family story is for $1,200 in the Napa Valley. I mean, you can't buy a pebble in the Napa Valley. Anyway, and we just always went there all summer, every summer, when I was a kid. Even during the war, when my brothers were off in service. And it just became that's my center of the world. And so, and I have gone back there, I guess almost every year of my life, at least once, and more than that. So this is a very unusual, in this country, in this time, is that anybody has a place that remains in the family for 3 or 4 generations, and that you can go back to. This is
Well, it's unusual.
And California, about California, you're having to get used to it. One does. I mean, unless one's born here, because California is biologically an island. It really is different from anything around. And how many plants are there that are such and such Californica? It's isolated by the deserts and the sea. And then up to the north, Oregon and California merge and blend past Ashland and so on, but then the climate changes. So this is a very extraordinary place. I just feel so lucky to have been born here.
Yeah. I wonder whether you now live in Oregon, a different landscape. Oregon.
It's New York.
He's Eastern.
Oregon. I'm practicing. You're in Oregon now, and a lot of Oregon sounds like organs You're an organ transplant or something.
I'm an immigrant, yeah.
Has it changed? I mean, you also write about that landscape, the Columbia River, the whole.
Well, in the desert.
The desert,
Oregon's where I
especially.
discovered the desert.
Yeah. How is that? I mean, you want to say something about that landscape in your world?
I said I'm glad I was born in California. I'm glad I live in Oregon. I love the West. And I love writing about the West, and I love reading about the West. This is an amazing place.
Yeah.
It is also barely habitable. In many, water, right from the start. If you don't manage your water in the West, you've had it. And we're getting there.
We're getting there.
Yeah, as you people with the drought know.
Before we leave the connection between your summer place and Always Coming Home, one of the things that struck me reading some of the recent poems you've shared with us is the space of the house. I mean, there's something, there are poems where you return to that house in, now, how do I pronounce Kishamish? Is that it?
Kishamish.
Kishamish, the name of the place, the ranch. There's a room in that house, and sometimes the room seems to be enclosing, and sometimes it's hardly there. The houses, and then there are houses. It's a big theme. The house is a big theme as a social space and a cosmological space in Always Coming Home. You know what I mean? And there's sections of poems about houses, and the social structure is built around houses. And I'm wondering if you think, if you have anything, kind of more to say about that, and whether
There's an awful lot to say about houses.
Yeah.
And particularly by women, and
Yeah.
by women who have kept house, as I did all my life. Also, the house in connection with the whole idea of the container, the basket, the thing that holds things. A house is a place that holds lives, and it holds them away from the rest of the world. Of course, it's protective and so on, and yet it's sort of. A house can be another skin, another body.
And yet it's not like the man's house is his castle. It's
No.
permeable. I mean, it's a net bag of sorts, isn't it? In the way you write about
absolutely.
houses.
Yeah. A house without windows is unthinkable. And
It's a supermax prison.
it's one of those big stores that don't have any windows. So those are horrible places. They really scare me. They really.
Jump in?
Well, I want to stay with it. I want, kind of joining with Jim, think about the plants and animals that are everywhere in your stories and in your poetry. And we were talking at breakfast this morning about what people might want to ask you, and a question that really kept coming up was, how does she keep telling these stories? How does she keep finding the sense of what's going on in the world that touches us? And I think my question in that is how the other critters of the world are part of your ongoing ability to tell stories.
I don't know, Donna. It's partly they. Well, they're here. We're sharing the world with them, and they have stories, and they are part of our story. And I'm interested in them, And so they give me whatever it is that you make stories out of, or poems. But I don't know how that works.
I read a book called Eating Stone recently by a woman who lives near Danai in the Navajo Nation, and who studies the desert bighorn sheep. And the title of her book is Eating Stone. And there were many of your poems that made me think of the intimacy of living with stone and the animals who depend on on grazing in the cracks between stones, and the modification of a hoof to be able to be acrobats across stone, and the connections of rhythms and surfaces and lives, and the throwaway, the extraordinary these are extraordinarily vulnerable populations of critters. And your poetry feels so evocative to me of your stones have so many layers of meaning for me.
I love rocks. I'm one of these people, wherever I go, I pick up rocks. And, you come home with your suitcase a lot heavier than it was. Then you lay the rocks out, and they're beautiful. Rocks are so beautiful. But then after a while, I actually have a rule about them. When I forget where they come from, they have to go out in the garden. And our garden is going to really interest future geologists very much.
Yeah.
But there's something about a rock. It is a little entity. You hold it in your hand. It's there. It's got weight. It's got presence. It's got color, dignity. And it's going to outlast you like you can't believe. And there's something, you're holding this thing that is, how old is it? Even as an entity. Yeah.
Well, you're opening up this whole question of different temporalities. And, the poem you read us about the tree, burning, as you beautifully put it, but slowly, and then us racing around burning brightly, and the tree outliving us, and you end up with something about when it was a sapling 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And I've always felt that. I ran into this in Paris in the Jardin des Plantes, and it was there that I discovered trees who I thought of as historical trees, in the sense that there would be this old tree, and the little sign would say, planté en 1720 par le père machin, Jésuite de Chine, and there would be some Jesuit,
with Oregon.
someone in China, who had brought this seed back, and it was still living, and it was going to outlive me, and it was this contact with the age of discovery, but a living contact, and that's what made me realize that there are different historicities, if you like, because the tree for me at least, it wasn't so much some sort of natural lifespan. It was the historical, all the things that tree had seen, that I could recognize as historical, as well as all the other things you bring up, which is the history of the tree, which is the birds it's known, the fires it's survived, all of these things. And that's the sort of vegetable historicity, if you like. And then there's stones, the temporality of stones you were talking about. They outlive us, but...
they were here before, and they're going to be there after. Yeah.
So what is that? There's a poem you didn't read, or did you, in the Borderlands? Do you know the one?
No. Yeah.
Where there's a sense of...
You wrote it, yeah.
Well, there's a sense of connection of your soul, I think it was, to stone. The idea that the soul yearns to return to stone. Do you remember? It's
a poem, a very old woman's poem about.
Yeah.
There are times that I just sort of feel like the parts of me that are stone or star or dust or whatever want to go back. They want to go back and be what they are, and what came together to make me. What's the Houseman poem? From far, from even morning, the stuff of life. I can't say it, but it's the same idea that one is almost an accidental concatenation of a lot of stuff getting together and becoming an entity for a while.
Well, at one level, it's the old dust to dust. But what I got
but
from...
that sounds so gloomy.
That's gloomy. What I loved about that poem and some other ways you've used stones is that these stones, which are a sort of deep contact with the earth in a way, but also put us in direct contact with astronomical time. You know, this earth is a rock among rocks in this enormous space of, and that, you know, that's a different temporality from the one we're even talking about in this conference, which is very much planetary, you know, and the life of a planet, which in this temporality is not exactly trivial, but it's just not.
Well, we can't, isn't the fact, we cannot really imagine very long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
We really are not equipped to think, I mean, the brain is sort of a practical thing, and it's got to be able to think quickly about now and spread out some when it has the leisure to, but essentially I cannot imagine how long ago the Jurassic era was. There's no way. I have tried, you know. I cannot imagine it. But maybe that's why I sort of value this contact with something like a rock that's older than the Jurassic, that's been there. And it carries in it that time that it's been here.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I want to change the focus a little bit to the question of technology.
Uh-oh.
And no, I mean, it's not so big a change because I think it involves the way you opened your remarks, the disposable world, the throwaway world that I get really angry when someone wants to update my system. I feel that it doesn't quite hit the, you know, it's sort of like, not like the beautiful erotic jazz song that comes most to mind, but you talk really eloquently about science and poetry and so on. Science, poetry, carpentry, all the things we need. You're very sparing when you talk about technology, because I think it's harder to talk about. And I think
But carpentry is technology.
Absolutely it is.
And lots of aspects of science are
And a fish,
highly technological.
and a penguin swimming in the water is technology. And
Well, no, not to an anthropologist. No.
well,
Right?
to a biologist.
No, technology means making.
Well, or the organization of skill to accomplish I'm thinking. Well, that's another kind. Okay, actually,
the crow with the stick. The crow with the stick. That's technology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
the crow with the stick.
If we don't stick to that definition, I think it gets too broad to talk about.
Well, I know what you're saying, but I spend a lot of time with bioengineers and biomolecular engineering folks who study the living world and its connectedness very much as a question of evolutionary engineering, by which I do not mean that they study it teleologically or, best adaptation. It's opportunistic, it's contingent, it's a lot of things, but are really deeply interested in the design dimension, in biodesign.
How it works.
How it works, truly how it works. And I think that work, which I find beautiful and ties me to the world in the how like a leaf way, is also very much part of the robo-bee drone to replace the honeybees, is very much part of the biomimetic military engineering world. These connections you're kind of 2 degrees of distance from this extraordinarily beautiful intimacy with the way the biological world is put together to the appropriation of that in a capitalist and militarist scientific system for the technologies of obliteration or replacement. So I find myself really, really needing to stay still with technology a lot. Mm-hmm. And I know you've been talking to Vandana Shiva, emailing back and forth.
Vandana Singh?
Oh, I thought I heard that.
Maybe different Vandanas?
The Vandana who is against GMOs. Shiva. Anyway, it doesn't
I'm
matter.
not, no, I'm, no.
Different one.
No.
Okay, different person. I misread the email.
mine's
But,
a
okay,
young,
well,
a
but
young
the
writer named
question's
Von
the,
Singh.
the question's the same. Is how to think about the technologies among us and your pleasures and displeasures. And I know the pencil is technology too. And we're both against high technology.
Against?
Well,
Well,
yeah, high meaning the astralized guy in the sky version, really up to the minute.
Well,
Seriously.
until we need to send an email.
No, but why? No. Why call that high technology?
Pretty high.
No, that's a
Compared
problem.
to the pencil.
Anyhow, what gets called high, and do we need to get rid of the word high?
Oh, yeah, well, that's like hard science fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah,
High, hard, in other words, masculine.
in other words, masculine.
I mean, it's a value judgment snuck into the word. Yeah, but I do think there is a useful, to me, distinction between. You see, what I get tired of is people talking about technology, and they mean the high technology, the recent advances of the last 50, 60 years, and often of the last 15 or 20 years. And there's this complete obliviousness to the fact that most of the sort of basic technologies, like, building, bricklaying, carpentry, sewing clothes, and so on, these are technologies of great refinement that have been worked on for hundreds of years and are absolutely gorgeous. And they're just, they don't count. That's not really technology. Well, the hell it isn't. And I think this is where often science fiction does kind of go wrong in thinking that the only good tech is high tech. So you see, to me, in my line of work, it's a really useful distinction that kind of needs repeating and driving home. Remember that, a wooden floor is a masterpiece of
I
engineering.
kind of like to use high technology for acts of domination, so that some very ancient controls of, let's say, irrigation projects in nation building in ancient worlds that produce structures of domination that astralize that turn the forces of the earth into the sky gods. Certain ways in which very ancient technologies produce the problems we are still living with seem to me, it's the technologies that are about the appropriation of value, and it's for the high gods, for the rulers. I want to use high technology more that way, rather than in relationship to whether it's, say, biomolecular engineering versus carpentry, both of which are technologies.
Well, why not just call it state technology?
Well, I think,
And the
you're
high-low
one
is
of
very
we need more than one
metaphysical.
term for these
Yeah.
big things.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if this is sort of the technology of the high gods, you could call it Jovian or something like that. You could-
Right. Well, or the word capitalism should make its appearance at a certain
I
point.
believe the word
And,
capitalism should make its appearance.
It needs to make its appearance.
Yeah,
Instead of just slithering across someone's.
and it's harder to say than Oregon.
Well, Donna has already introduced the phrase Capitalocene as an alternative to Anthropocene.
Yeah, for all that the Anthropos has really not been a shining example of how to live well, he really didn't do this thing called the Capitalocene.
Well, he did.
Anyway, that's another conversation. But I think high technology is tremendously bound up.
I'd like to hear that other conversation.
No, we'll have
We
it.
do it next year.
And, ending with the snaky, tentacular ones, the chthonic ones, the forces of the earth and the seas, blah blah blah, who have incredibly well designed bio bodies and many other things. But you both love and hate. Well, I mean, look at your whiteness poem, the Melville one. The little bit you didn't read was about the watching the screens that are giving you your imitation life.
You
I did read it.
You read that part too? Okay, I was undoubtedly looking down, wondering what I was going to say. Okay.
Still being on stage, yeah.
And, well, yes, but. And I'm really curious about your yes, but relationship to IT technologies as well as to I don't know.
Well, remember, they invented them when I was already in my 40s or more. That I didn't grow up with any of this stuff that is now absolutely second nature to my grandson. You know, and so I'm a stranger to this country. And getting into your 80s, you are a stranger in your own land always, I think. But in a fast-moving technological growth society such as we have, you are really estranged, and you cannot expect me to just embrace it and say, "Oh, isn't it all just absolutely wonderful? I can do it."
No, but I really don't think I'm asking you to do that.
All right, better not.
In spades. But I think that you are worried that I might be asking you to be doing that. Actually gets at not being in one's 80s, but perhaps being in Santa Cruz, a town where a lot of people won't vaccinate their kids. Where
We got them in Oregon.
well, it may be good reasons. I'm really interested in the love-hate relationship, the extraordinary fascination and repudiation of the things of science and technology among us. Because I think thinking better about that is part of learning to tell the ongoing story in the present tense. I think that having a present tense at all is going to be, we need to develop a much thicker culture for the poetries and the sciences. And I don't know how to do it, you don't know how to, we don't know how to do it. And I read science fiction in part because some of the best storytellers are trying to do it.
Yeah, and it has leaked out marvelously from science fiction into respectability.
Readability. That's bad, that part.
You know, the line between fiction and science fiction is very blurry now, and this is something I've been wanting to see for decades, and it's lovely to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you're part of the reason, literally. Okay, maybe, go ahead.
I just have one quick question on this technology, and then we were thinking we'll open it
We
up.
might let other people speak.
We'll open
We
it up for
imagine
the
that as a
audience for
possibility.
maybe 15 or 20 minutes. So prepare your short question.
Very short questions. Jim and I have allowed each other to go on a bit. We will not allow the same
Well,
from
we
you.
can't police it. We can't police it, but there'll be many people, so the shorter the better, and the more questions.
And the more specific.
Yeah.
Concreteness.
But lest we think that Ursula is against, you know, a lot of modern technology. In the Always Coming Home, which is a non-industrial society, you know, and a non-capitalist, non-industrial society, something has happened to capitalism and industrialism.
We outgrew it.
We're not quite sure, and we've outgrown it and grown back into.
We survived it.
But you keep, and you know, there are no cars, it's wagons and horses and so forth, but you keep something that feels like an incipient internet.
Oh, it's much more than that.
The exchange. Well,
Yeah.
would you tell them about the exchange?
Well, I can't really very well. You know, it's sort of embedded in the book, but it is an enormous sort of intergalactic internet. And the thing is that the people of the Valley are not very interested in it. So they don't really know about how far the information extends. It is an information exchange, purely. And that's really about all you know about it. And they can go to it and use it the way we use Google. They can essentially. The thing is, living in a very stable society, which is not a growth technology, not growth capitalism, they know how to do most things, so they don't have to keep looking it up.
Now there is a utopian statement.
Oh, yeah. Shamelessly.
In the usual sense of the term.
Except that there have been a lot of people on Earth who lived that way.
Yeah.
They knew how to do things.
Well, again, it's already here. what we think of is, I mean, a lot of the arts of living in a damaged planet are already here. And I would say that one of the things I got from that subtitle in the conference and thinking about living in a damaged world, I thought, well, where could we look for tools or examples? And I thought about the people who today tend to be bundled under the term indigenous, tribal, Aboriginal, First Nations, whatever. And these are folks who were all supposed to have disappeared, like Ishi, who stood for them all. Why? Because their worlds had been destroyed. Well, but they have, in fact, transformatively survived, and they have been living in a damaged world now for quite some time. And people who think in the sort of ecological vein, put it that way, go to indigenous people for wisdom about living close to the earth and for Mother Earth and all those things. But I think now we need to perhaps go to them, or at least converse with them, about how you live in a world that has been destroyed.
I would just add to that an absolute agreement that if you want to go to a people who know how to live in a world that's been destroyed, go to any American Indian. Mm-hmm. Their world was destroyed. And most reservations are extremely poor places, although, of course, the casinos have changed things a lot. And they are living in a damaged world and surviving.
Right. And you have
My turn. Go ahead.
Well, in the telling, the novel called The Telling, which is about some folks who are struggling to hold on to their culture and oral culture in the face of a kind of a state that wants to wipe it out.
It's a novel novelizing what Mao did to Taoism in China.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, that I know that's what provoked it, but it absolutely works for the story of so many indigenous societies, and there, you have a wonderful way of talking about the art of not being purist. One of the things I've learned from this indigenous model is no purism. You don't. No refusenikism. You know when to resist, but you also know when to give, and you know what to accept. You say you accept the new technologies, the new ways. If they work, we take them in. But it's an art of changing while still holding on to some thread, and it's an entangled, in some ways devious thread, but it's a real thread that's ancient. And that is coming through in these new circumstances. And that's, I think, what we could all learn from. And it's not some packageable wisdom that native peoples can, give to us.
Doesn't it always involve a sense of belonging to a people? Mm-hmm. And it's when that gets lost or destroyed that then the culture is lost, then the morale is gone. And this is kind of a big question for us, living in an enormous country like this. Who are my people? And I think it's very important to find out who your people are if you're going to survive and thrive in a difficult, changing world, right?
Right. Without virulent nationalism, we hope.
No, this has nothing to do with nationalism.
Without one more genocide. I want to, we're living, 7-odd billion of us are alive now, and about 3.5 billion of those folks were born recently. I mean, we're all born recently, but I mean really very recently. Yeah. And living in vast megacities. And I'm thinking of the indigenous of the Anthropocene, if we want to call it that, or the capitalist scene, which I prefer, as the born ones. It's both too big a story and not big enough, that there's a way in which there's a kind of folks are cobbling together lives in the slums around Lagos, and folks are cobbling together lives out of both, borrowed, stolen, remembered the skills and wisdoms, socialities. Folks in extraordinary dispossessions are of the indigeneities that Jim was enlarging, and also the indigeneities of being one of the born ones in the time of the late 20th century and on, when we're talking about a planet of, when I was born, it was like about 2 billion people. It will be about 11 billion at the end of the century if we're lucky. That's assuming birth rates remain low, et cetera. The born ones, as the indigenous of the hot earth, and who are, in fact, creating ways of a great dispossession, amazing dispossessions from land, from all kinds of things. Kinds of wealth are being made, kinds of well-being are being made by and among the born ones. And I think there's a kind of a need to study what I'm crudely calling the indigeneities of Abdul Malik Simon called the city yet to come. There's a way in which we also need something, the poetries and the sciences of these indigeneities, the indigenous to the Capitalocene and the Anthropocene. Something like that.
Before we open it up?
No, that's
Okay.
just
Can we bring the house lights
We
up?
have people with I was going to say binoculars, I actually mean microphones.
There are 2 microphones. Please speak in the mic so everyone can hear you, and so that the folks who are participating remotely in this event can hear you. Now, the question of how to recognize...
Well, I would like to say that everyone who wants to ask a question and knows what it is should stand up now.
Oh, no.
And
Okay,
all
how
of those
many?
people probably
No,
have...
those are just the first questioners.
All
No,
right.
you
Okay.
can't.
All right.
Is there a
Well,
mic
you will
that
be
they can come
called.
to?
Well, we need...
I hear there's a mic over here.
Okay, let's have a mic at the front and come up and form your own line.
Form a
because
line,
there's actually no way we
And
can...
the person with the mic
see
might
you
go
and
into
call
the
in.
line randomly,
this-
so as to get late-thinking people.
All right. Okay, come
Only
to the
one at a
front
time.
Come
and
to the
and
front,
line
form a
up,
line.
and we'll have a question
And
in
truly,
turn.
I think the person handing out the mic doesn't necessarily
no, it's
need
the
it to
standing mics.
give...
They don't need a person handing it out. No handing out.
Okay.
I don't think it should just be the people who got there first.
Well, this is going to be that way because
Okay,
there's
whatever.
no way we
Go
can
ahead.
select.
Let's get
The
started.
gentleman on the left, please.
Yes.
Hey, good evening, everybody, and thanks for a wonderful evening. Nice to meet all of you. I have a confession I'm greatly ashamed to make in front of all these people. I may be the only person in here who's never read anything by Ursula LeGuin, but Ursula, would you please give me a personal recommendation for the first or second or third thing, top 3 maybe, or the top 1 that I should read, and I promise I'll do it. Thank you.
Try The Left Hand of Darkness.
Okay, now this side.
On the other hand, I think you're the only author I have a whole shelf in my library dedicated to. I've tried to name a daughter after you, but the damn sea witch hijacked the name. So now I'm working on granddaughters, and I'm extracting promises. But my question is, to your knowledge, have any of your social structures or plans ever been enacted? For instance, the interlocking spirals of Always Coming Home in the town design.
No. I guess in some ways I haven't encouraged that can become a kind of groupieism, which kind of worries me. So I'd rather people kept it in their imaginations and used it to make a real world with, rather than playing with my invented world.
Thank you.
Hi, Ursula. So the suggestion was that the question be very straightforward. Hi. And this is it. I loved all 3 of the things you read tonight. The quasi-academic essay, the piece you wrote, I think, just for tonight, and the poems. And I wanted to read them all again. And I'm wondering the best way to find the pieces you read tonight.
Well, the little author of the Acacia Seeds is in my collected short stories.
Which is titled?
I think it's in The Wind's 12 Quarters.
I'm sorry?
I think it's in the collection called The Wind's 12. Oh, no, it's in my new, The Unreal and the Real is...
Buffalo Gal?
Yeah, okay, it's in Compass Rose, but it's in the...
Okay.
It's
It's
in
called
all-
Acacia
Wonderfully
Seeds?
reprinted.
Okay. The piece you wrote for the evening?
That's a...
Is that something
Occasional
that
piece. I
might
don't-
might the conference people post that?
Can
as-
we post it?
We'll talk
I
about
guess
it.
so.
We'll talk about it.
I'll have to, it's full of scribbles and
Yeah.
scratches
Sure.
and stuff, so.
The movement from science to poetry was incredibly moving. It would be great to see that again. And then the poems that you read tonight, how are they finding?
Well, I hope that they will come out in my next volume of poetry.
Wonderful. Thank
And-
you.
And the last one I read, the Aphrodite, is coming out in Alicia Ostreicher's collection next year.
Oh.
Well, I'm very proud to be in that.
Is the Whiteness poem published?
No.
Okay. Thanks so much.
And while you're waiting, Ursula's Finding My Elegy, new and selected poems, is great.
Full of
Very
amazing
recent.
poems.
And half the book is new stuff. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm on the. First of all, I just want to say what an honor it is to be able to ask you a question and to hear you speak tonight. You've been a huge influence on my life, and I know probably a lot of people feel that way. But I don't have an intellectual, philosophical question. I really, if I may, I want to ask you a personal question. Of all the questions that I could ask you, the one I wonder the most about is intellectual property and how you feel about the Harry Potter series. And maybe people ask you that all the time, but having read the Earthsea trilogy and then read the Harry Potter series, I felt, and I'm sure everyone who does felt, that it was derived from your work, and I wonder how you feel about that.
Well, I guess if you've got to be an influence, I hope you're a good influence. What do you say? Writers do steal from one another. There's nothing. The Avatar actually was the one that I was a little. That was a fairly raw steal in some ways from my book. Harry Potter, okay, School for Wizards. She sort of claimed, oh no, she never heard of any School for Wizards. But I don't know whether that's honest or not. But anyway, what does it matter? School for Wizards is a good idea.
Nicely put.
Yes.
Hi. I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for bringing this conversation with art, science, and feminism all together, in particular for me, as someone who has a background in arts and feminism. But my question is more about your poem on whiteness. I really enjoyed it, and it really made me rethink the temporality of the coloniality of power as it relates to the deployments of white supremacy and capitalism in our modern world. So for me, since you wrote that poem, I was wondering, what are some critical things that you think we should take away from whiteness and moving on in this current world in which colonialism and imperialism still impact us? So,
That's it's a wonderful question, and it's the kind of question that I cannot address. And this is going to sound kind of weaselly, but when I write a poem, I'm a poet, and a poet's. Okay, the unacknowledged legislators of humanity, Shelley said, but you're not giving directions. You have no instructions. You, in a sense, you have no information. It's not an information technology, poetry. You are just trying to strike a spark. But what fire that spark lights is up to the person whose spark it is, So I just have to sort of leave it there.
but isn't that art, though? Like, that is art. So thank you. That was a great answer. Thank you. I love that.
Hello. I am so honored to be here tonight, and I have a question about the Earthsea cycle and the way that gender roles progress in the Earthsea cycle, and your connection between women and dragons towards the end. And I see in the farthest shore the fear and the conflict in that book around death and the search for immortality. I see that in our use of technology and distracting that fear of death. And then in the Earthsea cycle, we have dragons as this healing force and a way to re-envision the world of the dead. And I'm curious if you could speak to how you see dragons and that relationship in our world today.
Oh, well, dragons today, yeah. It's wonderful. The question is kind of too big to handle in under about an hour. There's no anti-technology in Earthsea. That would be reading something in that I would be quite unaware of. That's just simple, plain fear of death. The dragon's relationship to life and death is never very explicit, never clear. And why women started turning into dragons in Earthsea, don't ask me. When you're dealing with material like that, you kind of take what's given you, and you try to make sense of it to the reader, but you don't try to interpret it. And I cannot. Now there are people who can they can tell me what I said in my book, and I say, yeah, I guess, yeah. But I'm not good at it.
So you answered that question about the way that massively successful pop
I'm sorry,
culture
could you start
forms-
over? We were whispering.
We were consulting.
We were consulting.
You answered that question about how your work, your speculations, your ideas, your scenes have been ripped off and appropriated by other very successful pop culture forms in a very generous way by saying that writers always steal from each other. But it seems that what happens in all of those appropriations, including Cloud Atlas, is a kind of flattening out and a moralizing and a simplifying of something that was in your original work very deliberately ambiguous and complex. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about the culture industry as such and about a kind of work that is more, not only more ambiguous and ambivalent and unclosed, but also more artisanal and local and craft-based?
I can just say I agree with everything you said. Yeah, I mean, you got it.
Hi, thank you. My question is putting two different topics that you've mentioned this evening, the first being the rock and the perplexity for humans to imagine the history of what this rock has lived through. And then you spoke of your grandson and technology. And putting those two together, I'm wondering for your grandson, for any possible future children he may have, for future babies of your family, and future babies of all of our families, I guess, what would you like to be the rock of your voice that survives from generation to generation, that you would like to see passed down from generation in honor of you?
Oh, just the idea of actually making something that gets passed on is so huge and kind of it's a rather overwhelming idea. You know, I'm just glad I can write stuff that means something to people now. And what happens? The one thing I hope doesn't happen is the thing that so often happens to women writers is they sort of get silenced after they die. If you notice that it's the men that, and women have to be sort of dug up again. Remember Willa Cather? You know, I hope we've stopped doing that. Mm-hmm. But that's a bit of a change of subject. Yeah.
Well, it's almost Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. And I have a question actually about your mother, which kind of follows from what you were just talking about. And what do you think was her main reason or goal for writing her book? And do you think she felt...
You mean Ishi?
Ishi, yes.
Yeah.
Do you think she felt that she accomplished what she set out to do? And what do you think she accomplished with that book?
Well,
she has lasted well beyond her life.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
She wrote the book in a sense. They of course I asked my father to write the book, and he was pretty old then, and he never went back. He never reminisced, and he said, "No, I don't write books about my friends." And Robert Heiser, the anthropologist, said, well, maybe Mrs. Kroeber would write the book. And so she took on that job, and it was a very heavy job.
I'm sure it was.
And actually, in some ways, you know, there is an issue for children called Is She Last of His Tribe?
Mm-hmm.
But that was even harder for her because she was trying to tell this terrible story of genocide for 12-year-olds, you know. So she sweat blood over those books.
Mm-hmm.
She also enjoyed it enormously and discovered that she could write a biography, you know. And then she got the letters from people saying, I cried. Your book made me cry. And she was always so happy when she got those letters. So she wanted, that's what she wanted. Yeah.
Hi, thank you all very much for being here and for taking questions. I have a question sort of about the broader Anthropocene topic that we're kind of here for, and it's sort of for everyone. I'd love to hear all of your voices if you're interested. There's a prominent, I believe, biologist named E.O. Wilson right now who's going on a book tour and kind of doing the whole circuit. And he was asked about the Anthropocene and how he feels humanity can sort of undo or repair or live with the damages that we've done. And he had this sort of interesting soundbite where he believed that technology got us into this problem, and so he also believes that technology is what will get us out of this problem. And it seems like kind of a fraught concept that I'd really love to hear you guys talk about.
That's what I was calling the techno fix, for shorthand. Yeah, but I would love to hear.
Well, stay tuned for Deborah Gordon in the upcoming conference, who, like E.O. Wilson, understands the order of the social insects, the basis of E.O. Wilson's great fatherly wisdom. By the way, I think E.O. Wilson has done some really important work for the love of the earth. But I do believe that he is, in the strict technical sense of the term, patriarchal, and that order comes from hierarchy. And Deborah Gordon's whole extraordinary biological work in exquisite detail understands the order, the worldings of this earth that work in quite other ways. Thank you. And that in that sense, the technofix is another nightmare. It's a kind of wet dream of the father whose technology has failed. And we need a few dragons.
Enough said. Be honest, how much longer would you like to go?
Thank you all very much for being here. It's been an immense pleasure to listen to the conversation.
Okay, you need to start again because we were.
I'm just giving you gratitude.
I'll be honest. I'm sorry.
We'll stop muttering.
You should know. Those of you in the line should know that we were discussing how much longer to go. I mean, you've taken a lot of energy and time from Ursula, so we're thinking 10 minutes.
Let's say four more, two on each side.
Okay.
4 more
And
questions,
so
okay?
that's clear. And the guys at the back,
So,
apologies.
guys, yeah, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
Great. Okay.
Well, then let me give you what could be a big and provocative topic, which is to challenge the idea of living in a damaged world, because I would like to hear your responses to someone saying, what if that's not actually true, or what if that's not the best way to look at it, because it would crystallize for me what it actually means to say living in a damaged world, because I think what that is sort of getting at is that our scale in numbers and our ability through technology is so far beyond how we evolved and how the world has evolved around us. So our home that we value with everything that's built into us evolutionarily is not what it used to be, and it's changing rapidly. But maybe that's okay, and there's a way that we can value what we do have and lose certain things in the creation of other things.
Where to start? I guess I would need to know what evidence a person claiming that we were not in a damaged world, how would they pose the question?
Well, I guess saying you live in a damaged world posits that were humanity not here, there would be some serene place that was untouched, that we should strive to live in that world.
Donna, please.
I don't think it implies that, and I think the notion that somehow human beings are flawed and have been surpassed by our own technology and we're to get what we deserve, or, I think those are very unhelpful, damaging stories. And when I say we live in a damaged world, I'm thinking of things like the rates of extinction of the critters on the earth, and the loss of ongoingness, not just of individuals, but of kinds upon kinds upon kinds, and that it doesn't have to be that way. One of the great insights of a particular branch of Marxism was that the established disorder is not necessary. And it's not some deep evolutionary flaw in human beings that we really can. The sky is falling, but has not yet fallen. Chicken Little, is still not the prophet here. And that not to understand the rate of loss and not to mourn the irreversibility of some of this loss. It has nothing to do with what we can perhaps keep or save or whatever. It's finally not altogether about us. It is really about the inhabitants of this world who are not all and not even mainly us, and how we all learn to get on together into some kind of thick present tense.
Yeah, amen to that. It's not about us.
Hi, thank you again for sharing this conversation and inviting us to share in it with you. I recently had the pleasure of reading your novel Lavinia, which I found really marvelous.
Thank you for raising that.
Both for what it had to say about things like how Indigenous people deal with a colonizing force, about humans' relationship to nature, to the world they live in, to poetry, and to their own past. And also, as a scholar and teacher of the classics, I found it deeply affecting and one of the most sensitive readings of Virgil I've ever come across. So thank you so much for that. And my question, very simply, is whether you have another project like that in the works.
Oh, I wish I did. I wish I could do something from Lucretius.
And the poem tonight was a wonderful ode to Lucretius. So thank you.
Well, I'll certainly second that, and if you don't know about Lavinia...
Go read it.
Go read it.
Right after The Left Hand of Darkness.
It came out of nowhere for us, and it's really
It came out of nowhere for me.
Yeah, with a lot of work. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you, Ursula, so much. You said that your hope was that you could spark something in somebody, and you have very deeply in so many of us. And my question is maybe too big, but about how the Tao Te Ching affected your perception, your writing, your view of life, your relationship to life.
How the Tao Te Ching, the Lao Tzu. Well, I read Lao Tzu ever since I was 14 or so, and it just became a way of looking at things that was endlessly nourishing. And so, the little poem I read, the Tao song, that this is sort of my understanding of the reassurance of this curious nihilistic philosophy. So it just got really deep into me, and so it's hard to talk about.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, this question is kind of prompted by the postulate of the Ansible, which has now become sort of a science fiction trope outside your work. But it's kind of a tangential question. Do you see any indications of a supramaterial, not necessarily theological, soul level to things, plants, animals, people, living systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
The soul is something extra, sort of?
It's not necessarily, it can't be detected physically. There's just a lot of smoke on the physical level.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. I don't know quite how to answer. Soul is a word I use because there isn't any other word.
Right.
To say whatever it is we're talking about, which may just be the togetherness of things, and
a field.
Yeah, but so yeah, you end up with words like soul, and,
yeah.
and you wish you didn't have to, but But people know what you mean, you know?
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. One last
This is
question.
our last question. Please talk into the microphone.
Into the microphone.
Would you please talk into the
Actually,
microphone?
it's Jim Fanero. I just wanted to tell you I did get a chance to say hello.
Okay, that's it.
Well, wait a minute. Wait, I think we just owe Ursula Le Guin an astonishing debt of thanks. And